I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. I'm Linda Norman. I'm a watercolor artist in the beautiful province of British Columbia. Today we'll take some leaves from the yard and imprint them on some watercolor paper and practice a little bit of negative painting. Always a handy thing to do. I've been having a lot of fun lately gathering leaves out of my yard. It's a great time of the year. It's just about summer here. I think we're going to have a hot one, so it's nice to get out in the yard and see the greenery. And I have some favorite leaves in my yard that I like to use for these kind of projects, and they're a little more firm. I do have some leaves that I absolutely love to see in my garden. It's a beautiful time of year, not too hot yet. It's getting there, and the leaves are just so gorgeous. And for this type of project, I want a leaf that's a little sturdier. Some of my favorites are bleeding hearts and ferns, but they're not strong enough for this project. And here's a bag of leaves that I had with me the other day when I did a class at the Society for Learning and Retirement, and we had such fun with it. And my favorites really, like here's the bleeding heart. It did not survive well. Just a gorgeous little leaf, too soft. The fern is beautiful, but I think just a little too detailed and too delicate for this kind of project. Really, my favorites always are my rose leaves and I brought some sage leaves in here. They're quite interesting. They have a beautiful veining on them, and that's another thing to consider when you're looking for leaves for this project, is something that has some beautiful veining, because we're going to put the paint on the back, pardon me, and imprint that onto the page. So I just wanted to look for just a couple of maybe smaller maple leaves. There's some nice ones in there. Take that big one off. And I may put a bigger one on, just sort of on the side. Let's see where that goes. So I've got a handful of leaves there. I think the rest I will leave in my collection there, and set these aside. These guys can go down here for now because they're not going to be a part of the game. And I'm really trying nowadays to be more conscious of making sure I paint to fit a proper mat. And this is a 7.5 by 10 opening with a what? Let's get this right. This is 11 by 14 with basically a 9.5 by 7.5 opening. So pretty standard frame or mat, and most frames will fit that, or most frames, the frames that will fit that are very easily accessible at your local craft stores and online, that kind of thing. So we'll stick with this. It gives me, I know I've got about an inch on each side. Maybe not quite there, but that's okay. I don't have to worry too much about that. I don't think I'll tape this because it's on a block, but this is an interesting block. It's called Fluid 100 Cold Press Finish, 100% cotton, 140 pound. That's a 9 by 12, so I know it's going to fit that mat. But it's considered a block, but it has both sides that are open. It's just glued on the top and the bottom. For this, I'm not too worried about it because I'm not applying a lot of water, so it's not going to buckle. I don't have to think about that. But I chose this one because the other one I was thinking of is just a little bit rougher surface, and I thought I'd like to have my imprints to be a little more crisp. If I was to try that on a rougher surface, of course the texture of the paper is going to keep all of the leaf surface from touching down to the paper. So I'm going to try it on the smoother one. We'll see what happens. And let's take a look here. So my paints, I've wetted them just a few minutes prior. I'll do that again just to make sure that they're ready and juicy. I do have my Lunar Series paints here, and I might try some of them. They might be kind of interesting for the shadows. So what we're going to do is imprint our leaf shapes and then go in and paint some negative painting around them to make them pop forward and give them some depth. So that's kind of a pretty shape. I like that. going to paint it on that surface. I just want to have another little look here at what I have. This is a very pretty little shape. The roses, they're quite lovely. These are very similar. Yeah, I think that's good. I thought I'd like to try to get different sizes available, you know, on the page as well. But I think that's probably okay. In my palette, I've got quinacridone gold, Mayan dark blue, undersea green, French ultramarine blue. For this, I like a more earthy toned palette. So I think I'll skip the French ultramarine blue. It's a bit on the bright side for this. If I was going to add any brights, it might be, you know, more of the quinacridone gold mixed with a little more water so it's brighter. And maybe on this palette here, I've got some serpentine. I might try a bit of that in there. But I think we'll keep it more earthy. So nice and thick. Doesn't really matter what kind of brush you use. I suppose you could use any of the round watercolor brushes. You want something that's going to pick up enough of the paint, of the pigment from your palette. And I don't know that I would use something as stiff as a bright. You probably wouldn't be able to pick up enough paint from your palette. So something that's going to give you, you know, a good load on your brush. You could, I suppose, use your Hake brushes as well, but then you might end up with a little more paint than you need, and that would be wasteful. So I'm going to start with my Mayan dark blue. Very thick, rich mixture, like heavy cream, kind of pasty almost. I'm just going to add a bit more water with my brush. And I'm just going to apply that to the back of these leaves. Again, you want to use the back because you want to get the paint on the veining, because that's what's going to hit your page surface. Now, leaves have they have that sort of protective coating on them. They're not going to absorb all of that paint. Put what you can on. You don't want it to be too thick either, because then you'll just get a blob. And I'm never too concerned about getting the entire leaf covered, because I want this to be intermittent. If you think about sunlight coming through some tree leaves and branches, and it's kind of dappled. And if you're looking at these leaves, perhaps laying on the ground or against a brick wall or something. So I'm gonna leave it with about that much. We'll see what happens. And I think what I'm going to do is just get another folded piece of paper towel. You could use any kind of paper. I just like that by doing that I can give it a bit of a press, and if anything oozes out the side, then it's going to be picked up. Now on this one, I didn't really do the stem, but I did get a nice, indication of it there, and I can always paint that in myself later if I want to. So that's a nice sized one, and I do like the shape of, pardon me, of those leaves. I'm just going to add the tiniest bit of paint again, and I don't want to make a pattern so that it's a repetition thing. So I'm just going to take this and just lay it off to the side so it's only partially there. Now again, this might not fit into my mat, but that's okay. If a little bit pokes through the side, that's going to be just fine. Example here. That's going to be a really pretty part of the design, I think. I see that often, and I think it's human nature for us to see patterns and try to create patterns, and we do that with our actions even. And painting, we sometimes get the windshield wiper action, or we start doing something and it suddenly becomes something that we're repeating, and that's not always the best way to achieve certain effects. So I think I had, here's some smaller ones. I like this little one here, and I want to make sure that I get the backside. This is going to be more delicate. It's a tinier leaf. But I think, and you'll have to play with, depending on what paints you're using, they're going to cover differently on these little leaves. And the amount of water will be, a consideration. And I don't mind that these two are kind of sticking together. That will create a different scenario from what we've got there. I'm just going to lay that there. Okay. I think I'll try go with some undersea green and just use that same little guy. If the paint is more watery, it's not going to leave as crisp an indentation. And here's an example. The undersea green is quite wet here. We'll see what happens. Yeah, a little more blobby, I would think. Let's try, because there was a lot on there, let's try it again without adding any more paint. That'll give us another level of depth of the colors on there. Yeah, nice shape, beautiful. I don't know that I would add a sage leaf in here. I don't think it's going to enhance that very much more than what we've got. But we did have, here's a three leaf one, and it's larger. Let's try that. Let's try that. And again, I think I'll go in with the green. I'm only going to do a couple of each color. If I decide later it needs more, then that's when I'll decide which colors to repeat more. So the Daniel Smith paints are going to work nicely for this because they're highly pigmented, they're thicker and they're richer, but you'll have fun experimenting with whatever you're using. I kind of like to make sure that I get at least one part of the leaf well covered so that I do get a good indication of a point or a base of the leaf. So that's where we're at with that. I'll try to cover that stem a tiny bit more and see what happens. So I think this is kind of going this way. Maybe we'll move this. Try to get things moving up. Get a bit of a flow, perhaps. Rather than a pattern, we want a flow. How about that? So again, the green was a bit wetter. I'm wondering if I just touch a dry brush in just to pull out a little tiny bit of that paint. That'll help. There we go. And just a bit more. I think the blue, the Mayan dark blue is a bit heavier pigmented in it, and it's going to look nice. I think if we put that, we'll maybe put another one sort of coming up this way. Like that. And I think I'll do one more blue, and then I'm going to switch over and see if we can't get a little bit of gold in there. So again, I'm just getting a tiny bit of this towards some of those edges. So I've got some movement going this way. Let's try a bit going that way and see what happens. Oh, I like that. I do like that. And I'm just going to put that there. See what else will come off it. A tiny bit. That's nice. I like that there's some that are bolder and some not quite so much. And I'm going to use what? I'm going to go back to this little guy. And there's still some blue paint on there. That's just great. I'm going to add some quinacridone gold right over top of that blue. I'm not going to blend the blue. If it's sitting in certain spots, that's just great. And I'm just going to lay the quinacridone gold right over top in some places. And This is actually overlapping that blue and that green a tiny bit. That's okay. So that's sort of giving me another level of earthy color, that brownish gold. And I do quite like that. And then this one has the standard 5, but it has a little leaf here that I think is really pretty. So I'm going to try to use that just to fill in a few little spots, and then we'll be done. That one wants to lay sideways. It's a fun little exercise to be, out looking for leaves in your local park or your yard if you can, and just try to think of what shape and what form would work well. I thought I had peony leaves, but I think someone in one of the classes might have used those the other day. So, but peony leaves, there's something about them. Even when I do eco prints, which is something we may talk about in the future, it's a process. It's a couple of hours process. So I might just give you maybe some written instructions one day or something on that, and show you some examples. But it can be really a fun thing to do. So I do kind of want to get this little part of this leaf here. Let's see if we can get those. Those didn't come out quite the way I thought they were going to. I didn't lay them down properly. That's okay. We'll put that one here. Encourage that little fellow to lay down. And I don't want to fill the whole thing, and I want to leave some white space. Because now we're going to start with our negative painting. And I think I just want to add just a tiny bit more of the green. I can see where there's a bit of a spot where it could use a bit, just a little bit of, there we go. And the orange, or the quinacridone gold and the green has kind of worked together on that, and see if any more will come off. Nope, a little tiny bit. All right, so now I'm just going to move these colorful leaves to the side. It's interesting, I picked these leaves on Tuesday morning. It is now a Friday when we're filming this, and most of them are still pretty usable, so that's kind of nice. Oh, you know what I was going to do? I was going to use one of these little maple leaves, and I forgot, so let's do that. Let's just do that. It's kind of a jagged edge. It's kind of pretty. Let's do this one. And I think I will try the green again. I do want to get some more of this green incorporated in. Sometimes these colors mix together and they become kind of a nondescript, either a brown or a gray, as you have them coming together. But that's okay. We'll mix a bit of blue in there too. My palette might be getting a slight bit dry, but that's okay. Let's see what this little maple leaf will do for us. I think I just want to have a tiny bit on that edge. Yes, that's pretty. I like that, that it's got that. Just a little bit of a slightly different shape. Okay. Might be fun to do one just with maple leaves too. They're really fun to do. My thought is, this is just, a fun way to practice negative painting, because that's a concept that not everybody can really feel comfortable with. And often there's not, in a loose intuitive painting, there's not a lot of negative painting required, but it is a helpful thing to know. I'm going to use a fairly fine brush. I just want to, I'm hesitant now, you know, if you've got your Levinson brush, by all means, go ahead and use that. That's going to be the workhorse for this. But I think you could use like a little round. Let's try that. This is from our local Opus Art Supplies in Western Canada, and it's their Galliano brand brushes. You can order them online from Opus Art Supplies as well. Pardon me. So with a shadow, if you observe, shadows are dark, and then they're not so dark, and they're various shades of darkness, and sometimes that color is kind of a nondescript color. When I'm doing shadows or considering shadows, I try to keep that color tone by using the colors that I've already used in my painting. So it's easy to blend those colors to get a nice dark, a nondescript kind of color. Another thing that I do sometimes use is a color called Moonglow. It's a Daniel Smith color, and it applies, you know, beautifully and granulates and has a pretty amazing array of colors in it. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of that in there just in case we decide we want to add that. If you're going to add more than what's already, you know, the colors that are already in your painting, do it sparingly. Use it as a highlight. That would be probably the best way to go. So I did clean my palette slightly before painting recently, but very often I will use what I call palette dirt, and it's just whatever's kind of slopped over to the sides or has been there for mixes. Oh, and I should mention also, if you noticed, I did not wet my page before I applied the leaves. This is wet on dry, so wet pigment and water onto a dry paper. So I'm going to look at my leaf shapes, take my brush, and it doesn't matter at this point, I don't think, how thick and rich your pigment is or how dark, because you can adjust that with adding water. And I think, am I dry enough to touch the page? That one's a bit wet still, but that's okay. We'll start over here. And I want to use a little bit of a contrasting color. So I've got some dark Mayan blue. These are a bit lighter over here. I'm going to just take that and I'm going to jiggle my brush to try to simulate the edge of those leaves. And then use the side of my brush and pull that color out slightly. So I'm giving an indication that this leaf is sitting forward. There's some shadowing happening here. And I've got another leaf here, so I'm just going to wiggle the edge of my brush in there. Try to continue that, follow that shape a tiny bit. The shape isn't evident here, but I know what that would look like by following the edge of the leaf. And so I'm going to bring that out and just try to bring those shapes a little bit together. Now, with a damp brush, you can encourage this shadow painting to move around, and I mean, you can start lighter and then add more pigment later once you get the shape of the leaves. But basically, we're outlining fluidly. The tendency sometimes is to outline like you're using a felt pen, which is not going to give you the same effect. Okay, so by moving this out and touching what's on the page, I've got a little bit of Mayan blue with a little bit of undersea green, and it's darker in places and lighter in places, and it's just kind of moving along the edge of these leaves. And like I said, by putting a lighter, like I'm just using whatever's still on my brush and encouraging this to move. I'm not reloading my brush. But if I think that now in here I would like a tiny bit more dark, I can just go in and touch the tip of my brush and introduce a bit more dark to this wet area. And because I'm putting pigment and water into a damp area, it's going to soften out. I want to just add a tiny bit for now. I don't want to encompass the whole edge of this leaf. I just want a certain portion of it, because if you look at shadows, they're different levels, right? And this is what we're trying to achieve. So you have to use your imagination to some extent. You have to use your powers of observation. And a combination of both. And so this is it. It's just simply a case of going around the edges, scuffling out some of that. You could, I suppose, for example, let's find one with lots of color. Maybe over here, you could just with a, make sure this is wet and clean before I do anything with it. Okay. So just with a wet brush, if you were to do that, you could bleed that out a tiny bit. It will still give you a soft shadowed effect, and that can be effective in some places, if that's what you're looking for, by just, like I said, using the paint that's already there on the edge of that leaf. If you want something more defined, then a little more paint on your brush. And soften those edges a tiny bit. Now normally I wouldn't have gone all the way around that. And if I want to lighten that up, I can. Remember, your quinacridone gold can push things away and change how things look. And the quinacridone gold with the Mayan blue gives you a beautiful shade of green as well. So you can just imagine how these colors can come together. Now, if you're using paints that are staining, you may find this a bit more challenging because they won't necessarily move from that edge. And this is always, it's always a learning experience. You'll learn which of your paints will work nicely for the blending and for the lifting and the shadows. Phthalo blues and phthalo greens do not. They make exceptional colors in your paintings, but they do stain, so they don't lift very well. Now this, I'm trying to think of how I laid this leaf in here. So there's a leaf there. And if it's on top, if this is on top of that leaf, then I do want to make a shadow there to show that there's an underside to that. And then this is kind of unclear how these leaves came together. Oh, because this was part of this set and this was a different one. So sometimes you have to use your imagination. So I'm just going to imagine that this was a little leaf coming up there. And I'm just going to take the color that's on the page and encourage that around and follow the shape. There's a little stem there, so I can see that was a little, perhaps another little leaf shape here. But you can see how using these thick, rich paints, you can paint forever, even also with just what's on your page. And so those little leaves there maybe go that way. And I can't tell if that's a leaf, so I'm just going to color that in with different shades of the shadows. Let your paints blend. If they just sort of move together and become fluid, they almost look like leaves themselves sometimes. But that's this is how you practice your negative painting. Think about how much color affects the how things look and the depth of them, and you might want to have darker color at the bottom of some leaves, and then spread it out to being lighter up at the top or along the sides. Bit by bit is actually the way to approach this, I think. If you were to do a whole, outline the whole section here, then you're going to have a very divided look between your leaves. Okay. And you can, I just bought myself a new little bright brush the other day, so this is a way to test that out. You can also lift colors out with a damp brush. And again, this takes practice lifting colors. Your brush needs to be fairly firm so that you can control where the bristles are going. And you need to know how much pressure and how much water to put on that brush to make things lighter. And for example, this leaf has dark on the one side. I would be tempted perhaps to do something maybe a little lighter on the other side, and just bring some of this green. I'm just going to mix it right here on the page and soften that green that's sort of been sitting there. And make it a little bit lighter. I can always darken that up if I need to afterwards. And that left a bit of a hard edge, but that's okay. We can try to soften that out with a little bit of a wet brush, damp brush, and perhaps just a tiny bit more color, just to soften that edge and let it come up a bit more. There we go. So for some of your stems, you could use a flat brush. You just don't quite get the blending power by doing that. So have some fun with it. Play around. Make your edges varied. Try some different movements with your brush, and take your time. Enjoy the process. Lighten things, darken things, and just see which level of color enhances the leaf in which way. Like I say, sometimes darker is better, sometimes lighter is better, depending on the way things have laid out. So yeah, give it a try. This is something you can doodle with and play around with. I wouldn't leave your edge colors. So for example, here I left this and moved on to something else, because then it's harder to reactivate. So try to work one at a time and then work your way out. And if it's leaving a line, then just add a bit more darker color to soften that where the color has ended. And vary things. Vary your colors. Vary your brush strokes. Vary the amount of water. And I mean, even if you filled in here, for example, all one color, then you can go back in afterwards and add just a tiny little bit of extra color while it's still damp, and then you will get that blending. Damp paper towel, just touching the surface. It looks, I've watched some of my videos back and it looks like I'm pressing hard, but I'm not. I'm just allowing the paper towel to touch the surface and pick up what's there, what's loose on the surface, what's wet on the surface. All right. Well, I could spend hours doing this. It's just such a fun and relaxing thing for me to do. And there's areas here where I can see some really, beautiful things happening. Maybe some areas didn't work out. That's the nature of of creating as you go. But I love doing these kind of projects because if there's an area in particular that I'm in love with, I would cut that maybe and make a bookmark or a greeting card or something out of it, or frame it smaller. If you're using 100% cotton paper, it tears nicely on the edges. You get those decal edges, and then you can just glue that right onto the surface of a card or a piece of matting, and frame it. So yeah, possibilities are endless. And in the course of just having some fun and playing, you've given your hand some brush time and maybe a little bit of muscle memory for when you do need to incorporate some negative painting. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. Played around with some watercolor imprints with leaves and did some negative painting, practicing some brush time. Always fun and relaxing, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you've seen, I invite you to subscribe to the channel.